Welcome back, people of Hope Lutheran Church, to our series of lectures on the characters in biblical history who have had such an enormous impact on the story of salvation, which, as I said previously, is the theme of the Bible, the story of how God has intervened within human history. Actually, Scripture you might understand as a story within the greater story of human history as a whole. This is the story of a people, of course, the people of God. But more than that, it is the story of how God both creates and makes that history what it is. So we left off last week with Abraham having had his firstborn child, Ishmael, with Hagar, his wife Sarah's handmaid. That represented, as you might recall, Sarah's inability to believe in the original promise. Recall that the promise was, you will have many descendants. They will inherit the land that I will show you, the land which at that time was called Canaan. It would have various names after that. And the most important aspect of this promise is that through you all the peoples of the earth will be blessed. Actually, we're going to get to that aspect of it, but not until we get to the New Testament. And to Paul in particular, who interprets that promise in some detail in the book of Romans. Okay, so Abraham has a child with Hagar. His name is Ishmael. And interestingly enough, shortly after that, three visitors show up. And these visitors restate the promise to Abraham and Sarah that they are going to have a child. Sarah's in the tent. She laughs and says to herself, "Shall I have pleasure after I have grown old?" Well, probably not. Nevertheless, she does conceive a child, and his name is Isaac, which means laughter. Abraham now has a particularly disturbing problem on two fronts. First, his firstborn son Ishmael is really his heir and ought to be the one who inherits the promise. But that's not in the cards, so to speak. That is not what God had in mind. And so that's not going to happen. But the way the story plays itself out is really a story of jealousy. When Hagar had her child, she could look at Sarah with some degree of a sense of superiority because here I am, I could have a child, Sarah, but you can't. Ha ha. Sarah didn't particularly appreciate that. And so she already had a certain degree of resentment against Hagar. But once Isaac was born, that did it. It was time for, as far as Sarah was concerned, it was time for Ishmael and Hagar to leave the family. So Abraham was told by his wife Sarah, you're going to have to get rid of them. Okay, they got to go. I don't want any problems with respect to Isaac being the one who inherits, everything. Who will be your heir, Abraham? So Abraham does what Sarah wants, and he tells Hagar and Ishmael that they're going to have to leave. But God is gracious. God does not simply abandon Hagar and Ishmael. In fact, God tells Ishmael that he is going to be the ancestor of 12 princes, and that they are going to make up a people, and that people will turn out to be the Arab peoples. So that's the way the biblical chronology has it anyway. According to the way that the Bible has the ancestors figured out, Ishmael and Hagar are the ancestors of the Arab peoples. And, of course, Abraham and Sarah of the Hebrew peoples. So Hagar and Ishmael are out of the picture at this point. I'm not going to go into all the details on that, but they're out of the picture for now. In the meantime, trouble has arisen also between Abraham and his nephew Lot. Okay, recall that Lot chose to settle east of the Dead Sea in what is now Jordan. That looked like a better place to settle, and since Abraham was going to give him a choice anyway, he was going to take the better choice. So he did. And he settled in the city of Sodom. There were two cities there, Sodom and Gomorrah, east of the Dead Sea. And according to the Bible, these two cities had become irredeemably evil. And God was about to destroy these two cities. So he warned Abraham to get Lot out of there. Okay, you've got to get your nephew Lot out of Sodom before I destroy it. And this results in a remarkable incident where Abraham bargains with God. And actually, the theme is God's justice and God's mercy. But in any case, Abraham says to God, well, look, God, what if there are 50 people there who are righteous? Would you, on account of the evil people there, would you destroy those 50 righteous people? And God says, well, for the 50 righteous, I will let the city continue to exist. I won't destroy it. Abraham says, well, okay, bear with me, God. What about if there's, and on he goes. Finally gets down to 10. What if there are 10 righteous people there, God? Will you save the city for the sake of those 10? And God says, for the sake of the 10, I will spare the city. Okay, the interesting aspect about this is that this is really this is really a, oh, how do we want to put it? It's a dialogue that illustrates the relationship between God's mercy and justice. And the way it comes out is that really God's mercy precludes God's justice in this particular case. God is merciful. He will spare the city, even for the sake of only a few righteous people. God will allow the city to continue to exist. In any case, two of those three people that visited Sarah and Jacob and told them they would have a son go into the city of Sodom to visit Lot. And the people of Sodom bang on the door, and they want Lot to give up those two visitors so that they can, quote, know them, unquote. In other words, so that they can use them sexually in whatever way they please. Lot is not going to allow that to happen because, after all, in the Middle East, it was not permissible to allow someone with whom you were showing hospitality to be abused in some way. But interestingly, Lot's moral compass doesn't really turn out to be all that impressive when you think about it, because what does he do instead? Well, he offers him his daughters. He says, well, I tell you what, I'll give you my daughters if you leave these other two alone. In other words, Lot is perfectly willing to allow his daughters to be abused sexually by these people if they will leave the two visitors alone. Well, in the end, Lot, the two visitors and his family flee the city quickly because it's about to be destroyed. And they are told, do not look back, because if you look back, you will turn into a pillar of salt. There's a lot of salt in that particular region, as I think I mentioned before. Unfortunately, Lot's wife, her curiosity gets the best of her. She turns around, she looks back while the city's being destroyed, and she turns into a pillar of salt. Now, you can see that pillar to this day. If you visit the area, it's still there. Supposedly, that at one time was Lot's wife. It is now a pillar of salt. But anyway, there it is. So they escape the city and are reunited with Abraham. Now, I'm going to jump ahead here to the final sort of, shall we say, test of faith when it comes to the story of Abraham. As I said before, this is a story of faith, and with respect to Abraham, his faith is going to be tested in a big way. But I'm going to offer you an interpretation that you probably have not heard before. And actually, I can't take credit for this interpretation. It came from a rabbi that I heard speak once. But in any case, this is the story. As you know, Abraham and Sarah had been waiting for Isaac mixing my own son up with Isaac, had been waiting for Isaac for a long time. God finally fulfills the promise, and then it seems as if God is going to do something that is, basically unthinkable. God tells Abraham to take his son Isaac, climb Mount Moriah, and there sacrifice Isaac to God. Okay, well, thanks a lot, God. After all of that waiting, after going through all of those different crises of faith and finally coming out in the end as a person who truly believed, and as a person to whom it was therefore reckoned to him as righteousness, now he has to sacrifice his son Isaac to the same God who had promised him this child in the first place. Doesn't sound like a particularly impressive God at this point. But Abraham, if he's anything, he's a person of faith, and he obeys God no matter what. Now, Mount Moriah, interestingly, has been traditionally defined as the place on which the Temple Mount was built in Jerusalem. So the Temple Mount, is a very the area on which the temple was built is very large. There's a large platform there, and many football fields long. And what's there now, of course, is that where the Jewish temple stood, that was destroyed first in 587 by the Babylonians. The only thing in the Holy of Holies, the holiest section of the temple, was the Ark of the Covenant, and nobody knows what happened to that except maybe Indiana Jones. That's where Mount Moriah traditionally was. Now, on that rock where supposedly Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, there is now a Muslim shrine called the Dome of the Rock. It's not a mosque, it's a shrine, okay? That's also the place from which Muhammad stood when he went on his journey to heaven, according to Muslim tradition. And on the other side of the Temple Mount is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, a very large mosque, the third holiest mosque in Islam, after the ones in Mecca. That's what's there now. But in any case, Abraham takes his son Isaac, and up Mount Moriah he goes with the intention of sacrificing him. When they get there, actually on the way, Isaac asks, where's the sacrifice? Father, where's the animal we're going to sacrifice? Abraham very wisely responds, God will provide, my son. When they get there, Abraham binds Isaac. He ties him up. He puts him on the altar. He raises the knife. He is about to kill his only son. On the assumption that God meant what he commanded when he told Abraham to sacrifice him. And at that moment, an angel grabs hold of Abraham's arm. He says, "Do not lay your hand on your son. You do not have to sacrifice your son. God is going to provide a ram instead." And sure enough, in a thicket right next to the place of sacrifice, they see a ram. So Abraham, overjoyed, hugs his son Isaac and puts the ram on the sacrificial altar, and he sacrifices the ram instead. Now, the traditional interpretation of this is that Abraham was such a person of faith that he was willing to do anything God commanded him to do. That's how much faith he had. So much faith, he was even willing to sacrifice his own son, the one he had waited for all those years, the one that was promised to him by God. That's what a person of faith really looks like, someone who's willing to do anything that God tells him to do. But here's another possible interpretation, one that I heard offered by a rabbi once, and that was that, yeah, it's the story of how Abraham was indeed a person of faith, but he was a person of faith in this sense. He believed all along that God would supply him with someone or with an animal to sacrifice. In other words, Abraham never believed that God wanted him to sacrifice Isaac. He was willing to take this trip and to go through the motions, so to speak, believing all along that God was going to provide this ram anyway, so that he was never going to have to sacrifice his son. And so Abraham was a person of faith in the sense that he believed God had, this ultimate purpose in mind that would spare his son Isaac and allow him to sacrifice the ram instead of his son Isaac. Okay, in any case, we're going to end the story of Abraham at this point. Abraham does marry again. In fact, he has quite a family tree. Abraham has a number of children by more than one woman. But Isaac is the one who inherits the promise. And when Isaac is old enough, what Abraham does is he sends one of his servants back up to their homeland in order to find Isaac a proper wife. It's got to be a wife from among his own people. So he goes up to, back up to presumably Haran, I guess it would be, and he finds a wife for Isaac, and her name is Rebekah. Unfortunately, as is the case with all of these women, she's barren. she can't have a child. Remember that children of promise are gifts of God. And so they can't be born in the normal way because they're gifts of God after all. So God is the one who provides these children. Nature has nothing to do with it. But here's the thing. Rebecca doesn't have just one child. She has two. Esau and Jacob. And by the way, Esau, and they're twins, but Esau is born first. So technically, Esau is the one who should be the heir to the property and to the promise. But that's not, interestingly enough, that's not the way it works out. And here's where it gets interesting. These two boys are very different. Esau is a typical masculine type guy. He loves to hunt. He provides, game for the family, and but he has one weakness in particular, and that is that he simply cannot seem to be able to tolerate any kind of discomfort. In other words, when he's in a situation where he is feeling uncomfortable, whether that's the result of hunger or something else, he will act rashly in order to solve the problem of his discomfort. So one day he comes back and he's absolutely ravished. He's so hungry. Jacob, on the other hand, is a mama's boy. Jacob hangs around the house. Jacob cooks. Jacob is the favorite of Rebekah, and Esau is the favorite of Isaac. So Esau comes back hungry from this hunt. And there's Jacob cooking up some kind of stew, lentil stew of some kind. So he says to Jacob, "Give me some of that stew, I'm starving." Jacob, he doesn't have that kind of a weakness, but Jacob is a moral reprobate, okay? He is willing to do anything to get what he wants. We might call him a narcissist, okay? So what does Jacob do? Jacob says to Esau, "Oh, I'll give you some of the stew, Esau, and you can satisfy your hunger, no problem. But you have to give me your birthright first." In other words, you have to give up your right to inherit the promise to me. Only then will I give you the stew. Esau does exactly that. And as the biblical text says, and so did Esau hate his birthright. In other words, Esau had a problem with values. Because of this weakness of his, he was willing to give up the thing that was the most precious in his life just for a bowl of stew so he could get himself out from under the hunger he was feeling. Not a particularly impressive individual. Jacob, on the other hand, not exactly impressive either, since he's willing to extort this thing right out of his brother's hands. So supposedly after this incident, now Jacob is going to be the one to inherit, he's going to be the heir who inherits everything, including the promise. But that's not the end of the story, okay? And here's another example where we may have a combination of two stories, one which originated with the E document, which came from the northern kingdom of Israel, and the other which originated with the J document, which came from the southern kingdom of Judah. It's possible. Okay, it's possible that the first story, where Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of lentil stew, came from the E document, or the northern kingdom. But there's also a story that's even more that shows Jacob in an even more negative light in the second story. Okay, in the second story, it's time for Isaac to finally give his blessing to Esau, whom he assumes will be the one to inherit the promise. He is the heir, after all. So, unfortunately, Isaac his eyesight is bad. He can't see very well, and he's ready to die. So he wants to have a last meal. So he tells Esau, go out and hunt some of that game you're so good at getting, Esau, and make me my last meal. So off he goes, hunting, so he can make this last meal. Well, in the meantime, both Rebekah and Jacob hear Isaac's request to Esau. So they hatch a conspiracy. What they're going to do is that Rebekah is going to make the meal. Okay, she's a great cook. She's going to make this wonderful meal that she knows Isaac is going to love. And she's also going to help Jacob disguise himself so that he is a lot like his brother Esau. Now, because Jacob can't see very well, he's easily fooled. So Rebekah makes him kind of hairy like his brother Esau is, and he has a particular odor, and anyway, he makes him seem a lot like Esau. And Jacob brings in this meal that Rebekah has cooked and says, to Isaac, "It is I, your son Esau, father, and I have made your meal for you." Well, Isaac is a little suspicious about this because he's not so sure this is Esau after all. And he says, "Well, wait a minute, my son, come closer." And he touches him and he smells and he's a little suspicious, but finally he gives in. All right. Maybe this really is Esau. So he eats the meal, and after eating the meal, he gives Jacob the blessing. Well, once the blessing is given, it can't be retracted. Once it's out, it's out. And since Jacob has received the blessing, he now is the heir to the promise. And Esau finally returns. He finds out what happened, and he is so angry that he decides he is going to kill his brother. Understandable. So Rebekah tells Jacob, "Flee for your life. Your brother's going to kill you." Now, this is a problem for Jacob because Jacob has been, a homebody all of his life. He's never gone anywhere. And the thought of leaving the nest and just going on this journey to God knows where, well, he knows where he's going, but he's never done anything like this before. It scares the bejeebies out of him. So, but he has no choice. So off he goes. And we're going to end it where he stops the first night. The first night he gets to a place called Bethel, and there he has a dream. And in that dream, he sees a ladder going all the way to heaven. And on this ladder are angels ascending and descending. In other words, the barrier between heaven and earth has been opened up, and God now can speak directly to Jacob, which he does. And he promises Jacob that he is the inheritor of the promise. He is the heir. He will be the one to carry this promise on into the future until one day it will come into being. And Jacob is so impressed that he decides to build an altar to God. But I'm going to end with this prayer he offers. Jacob is not a person of faith in any sense of the word yet. Okay, the guy, he's not an impressive guy. Okay, so rather than offer a prayer of thanksgiving, which most people would do, God got him to this place in the first, instance, the first day he got there safely. God restates the promise to him, says that you're going to be the heir. And what does Jacob pray to God? Well, fearful and anxious, Jacob offers this prayer to God. If God will be with me, and if God will keep me in this way that I go, And if God will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, in other words, if God takes care of my every need, so that I come again to my Father's house in peace. He's already thinking about coming back. Then the Lord shall be my God, and of all that you give me, I will surely give 1/10 to you. In other words, God, if you make me rich, I'll give you 1/10. If you take care of me, if you provide for my every need, this is a bargain, this is not a prayer. And it's something that human beings have been engaging in since the beginning of time. Bargaining with God. Fear and anxiety does that to a person, okay? What does not do that to a person is faith. When a person has faith, they don't bargain with God. But Jacob has yet to have faith. So, we're going to end this here. This is at Genesis chapter 28, verses 20 to 22, if you want to read that prayer. And we're going to pick up the story where Jacob finally makes it all the way up to where his family comes from. And we are going to see how God engineers the story of Jacob in such a way that Jacob actually begins to grow up and to become a genuine person of faith. See you next time. Bye-bye.